Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl arrived at the Fort Bragg courtroom for a sentencing hearing on Wednesday. Andrew CraftThe Fayetteville Observer, via Associated Press FORT BRAGG, NC. Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl's day of reckoning is fast approaching. A military judge will soon decide his punishment for desertion and endangering the troops who searched for him after he walked off his base in Afghanistan in June 2009. Sergeant Bergdahl pleaded guilty to both charges, and prosecutors have asked the judge to sentence him to 14 years in prison, along with a punitive discharge and reduction in rank. Now that both sides have finished presenting evidence at the sergeant's 12-week sentencing hearing, here are the main takeaways. President Trump's statements about the case may make the sentence less severe. While he was running for office last year, Mr. Trump called Sergeant Bergdahl a traitor who should be executed, a view he appeared to endorse again on October 16, saying, "I think people have heard my comments in the past, but Mr. Trump's apparent disgust and hatred for Sergeant Bergdahl, and his seeming inability to resist talking about him even after Army officials warned the administration, as documents suggest, that doing so could foul up the case, may now work to Sergeant Bergdahl's advantage." After the president's latest comments, the sergeant's lawyers asked the judge to dismiss the case or limit his potential punishment, arguing that Mr. Trump's statements had prejudiced the case because everyone in the military justice system ultimately reports to the president as commander-in-chief. The judge, Col. Jeffrey R. Nance of the Army, denied that request, but he said he would consider the president's comments as a mitigating factor when deciding on the sergeant's sentence. That means Colonel Nance will weigh them along with other evidence presented by both sides at the sentencing hearing, though how much weight he assigns them is anyone's guess. The judge said there was some evidence that the president's statements amounted to improper influence. While somewhat ambiguous, the plain meaning of the president's words to any reasonable hearer could be that, in spite of knowing that he should not comment on the pending sentencing in this case, he wanted to make sure that everyone remembered what he really thinks should happen to Sergeant Bergdahl, Colonel Nance said. The search for Sergeant Bergdahl took a toll in casualties. Army investigators say that no troops died trying to locate Sergeant Bergdahl after he disappeared. But prosecutors presented powerful and at times heart-wrenching testimony about several service members who were badly injured on search missions. One was Sergeant First Class Mark Allen, a Georgia National Guardsman, who was shot through the head. He had part of his brain removed during surgery and is now unable to walk, talk or take care of himself. Comrades vividly described the shot that felled Sergeant Allen, and the Taliban attack that left half of his six-man team wounded almost immediately after the fighting began. The men were quickly surrounded, and shooting did not let up until F-15 fighter jets and Apache helicopters arrived overhead, just as a cloud of his blood came out the left side of his head. Staff Sergeant Jason Walters, a member of the team, said of Sergeant Allen, "I started treating his wounds, talking to him, telling him to hang on." Sergeant Walters was himself nearly killed by a rocket-propelled grenade. Sergeant Allen's wife, Shannon, said her husband can now make eye contact, smile and cry, but a little more than that. "Instead of being his wife, I have become his caregiver," Ms. Allen testified. While she still loves him deeply, she said, "We can't even hold hands anymore." On a separate mission to rescue Sergeant Bergdahl, Jimmy Hatch, a senior chief petty officer in the Navy SEALs, was hit by a gunshot that shattered his thigh bone and ended his long career in special operations. Chief Hatch testified that he would later undergo 18 surgical procedures on his leg. Sergeant Bergdahl apologized for his actions. The sergeant, 31, expressed contrition and said he knew there was nothing he could say that could make up for the pain he caused. "My words can't take away what people have been through," Sergeant Bergdahl said on the witness stand. "Offering condolences is not enough. People went through things they shouldn't have had to go through. I grieve for those who have suffered and their families," he added. "It was never my intention for anyone to be hurt, and I never expected that to happen." His apology, and his decision to plead guilty, were meant to demonstrate to the judge that he had truly taken responsibility for his wrongdoing. The sergeant also described 5 years of torture at the hands of his captors, including beatings with copper cables and other abuse that was made worse by his repeated escape attempts. His most successful attempt came about a year after he was captured, when he used a nail that he had filed down with a rock to unlock his sluice. He got loose but was caught again after 8 days. After that, he was kept in a cage, 6 feet by 7 feet by 6.5 feet, for the remaining 4 years of his captivity. The Taliban showed him videos of prisoners being beheaded, he said, and the toughest part of captivity was waiting to see whether or not the person who opened the door, that would be the person who comes to execute you. Sergeant Bergdahl provided a trove of information about his captors. When the Obama administration obtained his release in 2014 in a controversial exchange for 5 Taliban detainees, Sergeant Bergdahl immediately provided all the information he could about Taliban tactics to American debriefers and intelligence officials, without a promise of protection from prosecution in return. It was a goldmine. Amber Dack, the government's lead intelligence analyst on Sergeant Bergdahl's abduction, said in court testimony, "It really reshaped the way we did intel collection in the area." Ms. Dack said that Sergeant Bergdahl provided unparalleled information about his captors in the Haqqani network, a powerful faction that operates on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. She described the sergeant as eager and motivated to help from the get-go, even when he was still disturbingly frail. Terrence Russell debriefed the sergeant as a senior official at the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency, the principal Defense Department agency responsible for recovering service members. Mr. Russell testified that the sergeant also provided valuable insights about hostage-taking and survival as a prisoner of war. Those insights are now used to teach service members how to stay alive and resist the enemy during captivity, as part of a program known as SERE, Survival, Evasion, Resistance and Escape. The information Sergeant Bergdahl provided is critical to prepare the fighting force, Mr. Russell testified. But he suggested that if the sergeant had not been prosecuted, he would have provided even more. "I need him now," Mr. Russell said. "I needed him 3 years ago.